It's 105.5 WDHA. I'm Jim Monahan here on the Jersey Magazine. The end of February as we wrap up Black History Month. We talk a lot about baseball on the show, and I thought it would be appropriate to bring in Bob Kendrick. He is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. Bob, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Jim. Thanks for having me, man. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you.
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was, and I saw this in the Star Ledger a few days ago, Hinchcliffe Stadium. Now, that's in Patterson, and it's been in various stages of disrepair over the years, but it was named a National Historic Landmark back in 2013. And I just saw about a $94 million restoration project that's going to restore this stadium. I think it'll be a multi-purpose. I wish they were just doing baseball, but that is, to me, Bob, just one of the great things going on here in New Jersey. And of course, it has a history with the Negro Leagues as well, with Larry Doby.
Yeah, no, any number of great Negro League stars played there at Hinchcliffe. The New York Black Yankees played a lot of their games at Hinchcliffe. And as you mentioned, the great Larry Doby, Monty Irvin, these are Hall of Famers who played on those very grounds. And so naturally, we are just elated to see that this stadium is going to return to its vibrancy once again. I was there in 2013 when the site was designated as a historic landmark. And when I walked on I guess it would have been the blacktop now infield of the stadium, and stood on those hollow grounds, man, Jim, it gave me chills, because as a steward of this story, you know what that particular stadium meant to this story that we now are in charge of preserving, and all of these legendary Negro Leaguers who played on that very field. And to be there and feel the ghost of Monty Irvin and Larry Doby and other greats, it gave me chills, man. And so I'm so very proud of what the Patterson community has done under the leadership of the mayor to restore and save that old historic landmark from the ruins of time.
Some of the artists' renderings that I've seen are really, really cool. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this. And you mentioned, when you go there, and even though it looks the way it does now, and you think of all the greats who have been there, that's one of the things that has always, I've always liked about Fenway Park in Boston. When you go there, every major leaguer, every American, great American leaguer, I mean, obviously there's interleague play now, but you go there and every player who had ever been in the American League for over 100 years played there. And there's just that sense of history. And I think that harkens to what you were talking about with Hinchcliffe Stadium, Bob.
Yeah, and there's not many of these old ballparks that the Negro Leagues once called home. And so now we're talking about Hinchcliffe, and we're talking about Hamtramck Stadium in Detroit, League Park in Cleveland. And of course, see, now I'm having a senior moment here. Rickwood Field in Birmingham, which is still operating and is the oldest operating professional baseball park. And so to have these landmarks made available so that it reminds us of, again, what the Negro Leagues represented both on and off the field is really significant. And I can't wait to see this ballpark functioning again. But not only the ballpark itself, Jim, as you alluded to in the opening, the fact that this is part of a major revitalization effort for the Patterson community. So it's not just the stadium. We're talking about economic development right alongside the revitalization of this old historic landmark stadium. And that also speaks to what the Negro Leagues represented off the field. So typically, wherever you had successful Black baseball, you had thriving Black economies. And so it is, I think, very endearing that the spirit of the Negro Leagues can help also lead a revitalization economically there in that area. And that ties directly into the story that we, again, preserve and celebrate and illuminate here in Kansas City. So yeah, we have a vested interest in this project, as we would with any of these other stadiums that I mentioned that are now being restored, revitalized, brought back into a level of functionality.
Let me ask you, you've mentioned economics, and I was going to do this later, but let's segue to it now. Buck O'Neil, who will be inducted into the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown later this year, back in 2006, had made a speech at Cooperstown when there were others who were being inducted. And he said, if I'm not mistaken, that the Negro Leagues was the third largest, in its heyday, the third largest Black business in the country. And I got to thinking, the way that things work, follow the money. How is a decision going to play out? Follow the money. Had integration not happened, do you think at some point the economics of the situation would have dictated a merger between the Negro Leagues and Major League Baseball?
That was Andrew Rube Foster's vision in 1920, Jim. Yeah, when he formed the Negro Leagues here in Kansas City 102 years ago, right around the corner from my office at the Purcell YMCA. That was his vision. He was such a visionary that he thought that he would create a league that was so dynamic that he would force Major League Baseball's hand to expand. So under his vision and his model, I oftentimes relate it back to what occurred when we saw the merger of the NFL, AFL, or for those who are basketball fans, the NBA and the ABA, where there would be a handful, if not all, of those teams that formed the Negro League. There were 8 teams that formed the Negro Leagues in 1920. So maybe not all 8 would have been brought into the fold, but perhaps 4 would have been brought into the fold. And then the other 4 teams, those players would have been divided amongst those. And under Rube's vision, you would have had complete integration in our game all the way back in the 1920s. And that's how forward thinking he was. And yeah, I think you're right. The overwhelming success of Black baseball could have eventually led to this, but instead, Major League Baseball focused on the field and started to siphon this talent out of the Negro Leagues with no replenishing system. And so that is what ultimately led to the demise of the Negro Leagues. You couldn't just take all this talent out and then there's no way to replace that talent, because by then the doors were wide open now for both Black and brown players to flow freely into the major leagues. Or if not, they could go through their minor league system. And while some Negro League teams thought that they might eventually become a feeder system, a minor league affiliate of major league teams, that was never going to happen. They already had their minor league systems in place. And so now they could completely bypass the Negro Leagues and still get that workforce that they wanted out of the Negro Leagues.
We're talking this morning with Bob Kendrick. He is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. Let's stay with Buck O'Neil for a second. What impressed you the most about Buck O'Neil?
His spirit. He had an amazing, endearing spirit. I tell people all the time, Buck O'Neil, to me, is one of the most amazing human beings to ever walk the face of this earth, who just happened to be a great baseball player. But most of us who fell in love with Buck, we didn't see him play. No, we fell in love with the Buck who told us about the heroes of the Negro Leagues. But more importantly, Jim, we fell in love with the Buck O'Neil who so beautifully and vividly demonstrated to all of us that you could indeed get further in this life with love than you could with hate. And that's what endeared a legion of fans to this very eloquent, gentle man. And he was energized by people, and people were energized by him. And I got to spend really an insurmountable amount of time traveling the country with Buck, as I would say, watching him preach the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of this museum, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, to any and everyone who would listen. And I guess now I've become a disciple of Buck O'Neil. You know, I'm holding on to the hem of his garment along this journey. And now I get to preach the gospel and the virtues of Buck's museum, but his spirit still fills this place. And man, I haven't stopped smiling since about 5:30 Sunday, December the 5th, when the formal announcement came in that he had finally taken his rightful place and been voted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame.
I had the opportunity to meet Buck O'Neill back. I think it was 1999. It was at a Major League Baseball All-Star Fan Fest. And I sat down with him for a few minutes. And Bob, I would love to tell you what the conversation was about. I don't remember it, but I do remember thinking, I'm in the company of baseball royalty here. And the way he exuded, just like you said, the love of the game
Yeah.
and all of that just came forth. And I do have an autographed baseball from him. And I asked him to sign it to me. And I don't know if he caught this or not, but when I get an autograph, a lot of people sell them on eBay. They're worth less if you have it personalized. So I don't know if an athlete knows that's why I do it, but it was my way of saying to him, this is for me.
For me.
I'm not selling this.
Exactly. And he was, he was great. I'm sure in that 99 All-Star game, I was somewhere tagging behind because that was my second year of working at the museum. I remember the 98 All-Star game was at Coors Field. And I'm trying to remember where 99 was. That in, where were we in 99?
I'm thinking Philadelphia, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, see, that's what happens. That's what time does, y'all. You forget about these things. But 99, I'm sure I was there because that was, again, my second year of being on the staff of the museum. I started at the museum as a volunteer in 1993 and had no idea, Jim, that I was walking into what would become my passion. And I just fell in love with this story, and I fell in love with the incredible athletes who made this story. And I was no different. I met Buck O'Neill for the first time in 1993. And as I've oftentimes said, once you're bitten by the Buck bug, man, it is a wrap. You just want to be on Buck's team. And that's exactly what happened to me as well. I had no idea that it would turn into really what I think could be such a rewarding and gratifying career. And I've enjoyed every moment of it. This is great work that we're doing. This is an amazing piece of baseball and Americana that so many people did not know much about, me included, when I first started on this journey. And I became almost engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way I felt about it. And so now to be a steward of this story in this capacity is very gratifying and very rewarding when you realize and understand that you're doing something that is bigger than you are. And if we do this right, we'll leave something that will stand the test of time so that others will have an opportunity to come here and learn. And I think more importantly, Jim, be inspired by the passion and pride and perseverance that these athletes demonstrated in the face of tremendous social adversity.
Yeah, I don't think that can be emphasized enough. And to localize the Buck O'Neill story a little bit, and I didn't know this until a couple of days ago when I was doing research for our interview, he was stationed here in New Jersey during World War II in 1944 and 1945. So like many baseball players, both black and white, he took time out of his career to serve the country. And that, of course, happened right here in New Jersey. And then you and I were talking a little earlier before we came on, another Negro League player here in New Jersey, in my town where I live now in Madison.
Yes.
Don Newcomb was born here. And again, I'm not sure how long Don Newcomb's family lived here in Madison, but old time Madisonian will tell you stories about Don Newcomb growing up here. So there's quite a connection between Hinchcliffe Stadium and the Newark Eagles and what have you. We're talking with Bob Kendrick. He is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri this morning here on the Jersey Magazine at 105.5 WDHA. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about was something that minor league baseball is doing this year called the Nine, an initiative that is celebrating the historic impact that Black baseball pioneers made on the sport of baseball. And the 9 refers to, if I'm not mistaken, Jackie Robinson's number that he wore in the minor leagues, right?
Yes.
What can you tell us about the 9?
Well, number one, I tip my cap to minor league baseball for its efforts to bring diversity to its ballparks and to put in measures, Jim, that will make it feel welcoming for African American and Hispanic fans to attend those games. That is significant. And as we continue to try and grow our sport and have it be which I think is, from a playing field perspective, baseball is perhaps the most diverse sport of them all. You got people from around the globe playing this game. Now, what we do know is there's been a tremendous decline in African American participation in our sport. And we've also seen a decline in African Americans attending games. I have no doubt that the two are correlated, and so it is, I think, a great initiative to see minor league baseball doing some things that, again, will make all fans feel welcome, but particularly Black and brown fans who maybe haven't felt like there were things for them to be a part of in some of these stadiums, and that the players that are on the field are not reflective of the communities that we're talking about touching. And so as we look at this year and the significance of this year being the 75th anniversary of Jackie's breaking of the color barrier and what that meant. And I don't know if you can see the gold frame photo right over my shoulder, but that is a photograph of Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige when they were teammates on the 1945 Kansas City Monarchs. And a lot of people don't know that Jackie Robinson's illustrious professional career began right here in Kansas City. I think people think that Jackie just walked out of nowhere and started playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers, but his real rookie season was here in Kansas City in 1945. And that's something that we are tremendously proud of, that it was the great city of Kansas City and the Negro Leagues that gave America arguably its greatest hero in Jackie Robinson. And so to see this kind of initiative launched and the commitment that's being made by minor league baseball to this effort and have it coincide with the 75th anniversary of the breaking of the color barrier, which we believe, and make the bold assertion that Robinson's breaking of the color barrier wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement, that it was actually the beginning of the civil rights movement in this country. As I relate back to folks, this is before those more noted civil rights occurrences. So this is before Brown versus the Board of Education. This is before Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus. As Buck O'Neill would so eloquently say, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was merely a sophomore at Morehouse College when Jackie signed his contract to play in the Dodgers organization. Our very own President Truman, Independence, Missouri, right up the road from Kansas City, wouldn't integrate the armed forces until a year after Jackie Robinson. And so for all intensive purposes, this is what started the ball of social progress rolling in our country, and it all emanates from the Negro Leagues. And so again, we kind of have a vested interest in these kinds of initiatives because as much as we work to preserve this history, we're still a part of promoting the great sport of baseball. And we want everybody to enjoy this game. We want all of our children to play this game or at least have access to this game. Because, and you're hearing it from someone who played basketball growing up and a little bit of small college basketball here in this area, baseball is still the greatest game ever invented. Yeah, you learn a lot about yourself in a game that is predicated on failure.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it is predicated on failure. And I remind people that Jackie Robinson was thrust into a world where he cannot fail, and he's in a game of failure. Yeah, and if he had failed, Jim, an entire race of people would have failed. You see, because the naysayers would have said, well, see, I told you they couldn't handle it. If he couldn't handle the abuse that he was going to experience, as we know, which was just, I mean, it's almost unfathomable to think about the level of abuse this man had to endure when he took the field with the Brooklyn Dodgers. If he can't handle the abuse, the naysayers would have said, see, I told you they couldn't handle it. If he can't play, the naysayers would have said, see, I told you they weren't good enough to play in our league. And then you couple that with the fact that he was literally carrying 21 million Black folks on his back when he walked across those lines. So that's why I say, had he failed, an entire race of people would have failed. Man, that's an enormous amount of pressure for any one man to bear. You know, as we both understand, in this game of failure, where if you get 3 hits every 10 trips to the plate, man, you're a Hall of Famer.
And that's a point that's brought out beautifully, I think, in the movie 42 that
Yes.
came out a few years ago. There's the little black kid who's with his mom, as I recall, and he's just rooting Jackie on because he understands the importance of what that means. He's a composite character, I get it, but you
Yeah.
get that sense. You
Oh,
definitely get that
absolutely.
sense.
I have a podcast called Black Diamonds that I do with my friends over at Sirius XM Radio. And in the podcast, we make the analogy of what it meant for the African American community when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. So it was indeed equivalent to the euphoria that we saw in this country when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. That's how exciting this was for Black folks because we had been waiting for this opportunity. In spite of what had been done in building the Negro Leagues and these exceptionally gifted athletes that were playing in the Negro Leagues, the world still said the highest level in which you could play baseball was still considered to be, at that time, the white major league. And so I think they all wanted to prove to the world that they could play this game as well as anyone. And our fan base that had been so loyal to the Negro Leagues, they wanted to see how their great Black stars would fare if and when they got the opportunity. So this was complete euphoria. Now, another New Jersey guy, Larry Doby, would integrate the American League just weeks after Jackie, and no one really paid Larry any attention. and Larry is as much a pioneer, but that's how we are in our society. We always celebrate the first. We rarely ever remember the second. And if you're number 16, you can pretty much forget it. Nobody ever remembers you. And Larry Doby, y'all went through just as much. Some may even argue even more than Jackie. And Larry Doby, but Jackie was playing in a major urban center, Brooklyn, with the national media following him. Larry Doby was playing in Cleveland, and while Cleveland certainly had its, fair share of Black folks living there, it wasn't the urban center that Brooklyn was, and the national media really wasn't paying Larry Doby any attention. Folks, Larry Doby was 23 years old when he joined the Cleveland Indians in 1947, and he is too thrown into a powder keg of racism. Larry Doby never played a day in the minor leagues. He went straight from Effa Manley's Newark Eagles over to Cleveland. The very next year, Larry Doby helps Cleveland win the last World Series that Cleveland has won. Now, my Cleveland baseball fans get tired of hearing me say that, but 48 was the last time they won the World Series, led by Larry Doby and an age-defying Satchel Paige in 1948. And I tell people all the time, while Jackie Robinson might have been Neil Armstrong, Larry Doby was essentially our Buzz Aldrin. Yeah, Buzz landed on the moon, and nobody seems to remember that Buzz landed on the moon. Poor Buzz gets no love. But all of this was monumental in advancing social causes in this country, even though it came at the demise of the Negro Leagues.
You mentioned a little earlier as we wrap things up here about Buck O'Neill's passion. And then as you started out at the museum, your passion for the game. And I've seen you numerous times on the MLB network, Bob, and your passion jumps off the screen. I thank you so much for joining me this morning. For DHA listeners who want more information on the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, the website is nlbm.com. And of course, the 9 at a couple of the minor league ballparks here in New Jersey coming this summer. Bob, again, thank you so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed our time together, and your passion, as I said, jumps off the screen. Thank you.
Oh, Jim, man, thanks for having me. And again, I finally remember what that 1999 All-Star game was. That was in Boston.
There you go. I should know that as a Red Sox fan. Thank you, Bob.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.